Billy Joel, completely retold.
Running, barring hurricanes and such, 365 days a year now for over 40 years, every single day. And members are the real reason why we are, every membership is almost, people say, oh, you apply for grants, you do this. Every membership you buy is like a little grant, and they add up. And it's so, even if you're just a basic member, or a dual member, or a senior member, or one of the Young Film Friends members, it counts so much. It means so much to us. If you're not a member, that's okay. Don't feel bad. Maybe a little bit. Just kidding. No, don't feel bad. The cinema is open, I said, 365 days a year. It's open to everyone. But if this is something you like having here in your community, you like having this, that there's going to be a Billy Joel event, and there are going to be all these people, guests who have enormous history with Billy and will be able to tell you all kinds of interesting stuff. The best way you can express that feeling is by joining up, becoming a member, become part of our family. So I hope you give that some thought. So this is, also just going to mention, we have, I assume people here like music, right? Okay. We have a couple of programs I want to quickly mention. Tomorrow night, we're having our Rock Legends program. It's going to be Steve Winwood, Traffic, and Spencer Davis Group. These are rare concert films of all the amazing performances from throughout the years. Wednesday, we're doing the documentary Harlem Street Singer about the Reverend Gary Davis. It's a fantastic film. Woody Mann will be here. There'll be some live music as well. It's going to be really, really great. So if you love music, you might want to just be here every day this week. But hopefully maybe if you come check this out. So please enjoy, and we'll be back here afterwards after this wonderful film to present our guests and talk more about Billy Joel. Thanks. Cool. All right. It gives me great pleasure to introduce from the Long Island Music Hall of Fame, Tom Needham. Also from WUSB, Long Island's greatest radio station.
Thank you very much. First off, I want to thank Dylan and the Cinema Arts Center for giving the Long Island Music Hall of Fame the opportunity tonight to have this fundraiser, and I want to thank all of you for coming tonight. There's also some other people I'd like to just point out. This film could not be possible tonight without the help of Billy Joel's archivist and the producer of this film, Jeff Schock, who's over there. Thank you very much, Jeff. In addition, I know we have a lot of people in the audience tonight that were big fans of Doug Stegmeyer, who's and I'd like to say thank you to his mom, who's in the audience tonight, Peg Stegmeyer. Peg, if you can stand up and say hi. She's over there. All right. Happy birthday, Peg. In addition, I'd like to thank some of my fellow board members who are here tonight from the Long Island Music Hall of Fame in the back, and thanks for their support. Tonight we have three very special guests, and what I'd like to do is invite them up here and ask them some questions, and then also give some of you in the audience an opportunity to speak to them as well and ask some questions. So first off, I'd like to invite Jim Brown, the director of the film. I'd also like to invite Oleg Smirnov, Billy Joel's translator. And last but not least, a true legend, Billy Joel's longtime guitar player, also featured in the documentary, Russell Javors. So, let's start with Jim, okay? Jim, for those people that don't know, Jim is an Emmy award-winning documentary filmmaker, and he's done a lot of work in the field of music documentaries. And I was very interested in why you were attracted to this project, and in particular, once you agreed to do it, how you took all of this footage. You had music, backstage footage, and then a lot of history that I know that you're very interested in terms of Russia, and how you decided to tell the story that you wanted to tell in this documentary.
Well, first of all, it's nice to be in Long Island, Billy Joel's kind of stomping ground, and produced some great art. I was actually, for the last 5 years, been making a film about rock and roll in the Cold War. And we had wanted to interview Billy for that since the beginning of making that film. And it finally, channels aligned and it got in the right place, and an interview happened. And at that point I knew a little bit more than the average person about how the role rock and roll did play in the Cold War. And it was my opinion that Billy had gone kind of at this perfect storm of a time when basically Glasnost had started, and he kind of was the first guy that come in and write his own ticket and say, we're not going to do it unless this and this happens. And they were, I think, fairly receptive to letting all those things happen. And so it seemed to me that rock and roll actually played a pivotal role in maybe easing the tensions of the Cold War and maybe even bringing an end to it. And when Billy and I got together for that first interview, I think something clicked, because I was aware of this film, which was originally shot by Martin Bell, the great documentary filmmaker. And the concert footage was Wayne Isham, who was like one of my gods, who did a lot of concert films back in the 80s and 90s and still does. And I had worked at Sony doing projects, and I was aware of both these things in the 80s. And it seemed like I had seen them, and it was like a great film and a great event. So I think just asking maybe some of the questions I did with Billy, and then his people, and Jeff, who was there, Jeff Schock, and then all of a sudden we began talking about maybe doing something with this footage, of which there was an incredible amount of outtakes, and there were no interviews really in the Martin Bell film. So, and Billy really couldn't talk about at the time what he was trying to do, because it would have, as he says in the film, it probably would have defeated him. So now he could talk openly about what his true motivations were, and also kind of assess openly what had happened, and other people could assess what had happened. And so it became a discussion that we started to have with Jeff and Billy's manager and Sony Music, and I think we were up and running about a couple months later.
One of the segments I really liked in the film is the whole montage when he's singing the Bob Dylan song. Yeah. And I felt like that segment, with all the editing and the music, really kind of captured one of the major messages of the film. Can you talk about that sequence?
Well, I think maybe better Oleg, because I think times were changing. I didn't experience that. I just kind of come in and look at the pieces and weave the film together and try to tell a story out of it that makes sense and that's true. But I think times were changing, Rhoda.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's the reason why Billy, I guess, decided to come to Russia at that time. As you can imagine, there was a huge discussion, and Russell will confirm it. What kind of songs Billy should perform? Rock and roll, ballads, honesty. So when I was asked as his trusty advisor, you know, what Russians like, I told him they like anything in A minor. This is the Russian key. And honesty number one on the list, Russell, right? And then some ballads and this, that. And then the first concert was kind of strange because what the words that you use in rock and roll, oil painting?
Yeah, it was an oil painting.
People just sitting, looking at you, they don't do that much. And that's another thing, what kind of people? Because it's not like in the States, you couldn't just go and get a ticket. The beautiful people got the ticket. You know, the ones controlling the government, KGB, you know, people in the power. So tough audience. And then after the first concert, I think that you guys realized that perhaps they need more rock and roll. Let's shake them. And for the first time ever, by the way, in the history of the Soviet Union and Russia, there was a mosh pit. Because this thing did not exist, because we should control the audience. We shouldn't allow people to the stage. They can do things. And Billy didn't have the security per se. It was basically stage hands, you know, the guys. But they taught the local guys, which were really Russian security guys, how to control the crowd without basically killing them. just telling them, you know, how to get to stage and where to cut off the crowd, and then you've got, it's nice and easy, and everybody enjoying, as you saw in the documentary, enjoying themselves. So the choice of songs was a tough one, but then I think at the end, Russell, what did you enjoy more, ballads or rock and rolls?
Well, the thing I remember most is on the first show, and everybody was a little bit, we didn't know what to expect. And we're on the lip of the stage, and as the intro music is starting, Billy was off to the side, and it was me and Liv and the guys standing, waiting to go on. There's a bunch of reporters there talking to us. And so as the lights go out and we're getting ready to go on, and they came over to us and they said, well, this is such a big occasion, it's so momentous, and what are you thinking? And Liv grabs the mic and he looks right into the guy's face and he goes, all right, you commies, let's boogie. So that, whenever I think of the tour, that's the thing that pops into my mind.
Good old Liv. You know, one thing that's interesting was that just a few years before Billy went, Elton John had gone, and they wouldn't allow him to bring in electronic instruments. He had to play acoustically with just him and a percussionist. And if people stood up, the guys in blue suits would push them down in the seats. So to have that transform itself, what happened was, I think Gorbachev came to power and wanted glasnost and perestroika and social reforms. And he welcomed this tour because the youth, I believe, of Russia was really beginning to doubt the whole Communist Party and the future of Russia and the Soviet Union, more the future of the Soviet Union. And they didn't really believe in the system, so he wanted more transparency, more things Western. And this was the first real dose of rock and roll that they got, and it was the same show that Russ and Liberty and Billy would have put on at Madison Square Garden. There'd been other rock and roll shows occasionally in Russia, but this was a full-fledged stadium show with sound and lights. And as part of that, it was the first time that people were permitted to get up out of their seats, and Billy, as you see in the film, actually went back and got them down in front because he needs the fans' energy down in front to give a good performance. And you know, it transformed the way rock and roll was played in Russia.
It kind of reminded me of when we first started playing. The first tour I did with Billy, we were opening up for the Beach Boys. We were, you know, not in the friendliest circumstances because people, for the most part, didn't know who we were. So we were a determined bunch of individuals that we were going to get up there and really go for it. And this tour kind of, starting here was kind of the first time that we had that feeling. We had seen some success, and here we were in that same circumstance, and it kind of brought back that little spark that we looked at each other and, we have to win this crowd over. And it was, so it was kind of interesting watching the way Billy broke it down. But it was not too dissimilar from, from when we first started out. So it was kind of interesting to me to see that.
Russell, one of the parts I really liked about the documentary that wasn't so much about Russia, but was included, was at the end of the movie, when you talk about how a lot of you came to realize that this was the end of an era for the band. Can you talk about a little bit about those feelings and how you sensed that on this tour and stuff like that?
Well, sure. Prior to the tour, for whatever reason, we were setting up the circumstances as to how we were going to do this. And Billy was paying for this out of his pocket, so at the end of the day, we agreed to do a number of things to do this tour. And when I saw that David wasn't with us, and David was such an integral part of our band, that for whatever reason why David wasn't there, I knew it was over. It was, for whatever, something was breaking apart. You could kind of feel that it was starting to, the wheels were coming off. So in that regard, it was a little sad, and but on the other hand, it was the most exhilarating concert that we had done, and so I had these two sets of feelings going on at the same time. So it was a strange tour, but I clearly had the feeling that was about it.
Oleg, can you just tell the audience, what were you doing before this event? And then also, how did this tour, your relationship with Billy, appearing on the CD in the documentary, how did this change your life, if at all?
Well, what I was doing before, nothing can compare with what I had with Billy Joel. I was a professional translator and interpreter, trained as one. And I worked with other American entertainers, John Denver, on his tour of the Soviet Union, Paul Winter, the saxophone player, a couple of other guys. And the guys who brought John Denver to Russia, they were also part of the Russian entourage consultants of Billy Joel, and I guess they recommended me to Billy. The only thing Russell will support me, Billy hires everybody personally. There is no such thing as, at least I was told that that's what was going on. And so it was a problem. Billy was in London because it was the end of the Bridge tour and they were in London. And he, at that time, it wasn't like me buying a ticket even on Billy's dime and flying a Russian guy to London to meet Billy Joel and to chat with him. So he had to call me, and we had a discussion for about 15 minutes. I don't remember exactly what we were talking about, but obviously I came across as an okay guy, so I can work with him. I remember I told Billy that you should come here sooner because we're sick and tired of watching your videos on Russian TV, because his guys, they gave all these videos for free to Russian TV, and there was not that much to watch on Russian TV at that time, so they put them on, and day after day, every hour, there was Billy Joel. I said, cut it out, because come here, people are getting sick and tired of your Uptown Girl. I think he bought it, and it was fun. Though the concert was a very unusual one because he talked. And Russell knows that singing and talking, it doesn't go together. And besides that, Billy had problems with his throat after improvised concert in Tbilisi, Georgia, because he was advised that sliding into Russia will be easier made through Georgia. First you go to Georgia, the Republic of the Soviet Union, and then you go to Moscow. And so he decided to talk because we realized, and I tried to explain to him, that your ballads, they're fantastic, lyrics are fantastic, but Russians won't get it. For instance, Goodnight Saigon. The moment you hear the sound of helicopters, you know it's about Vietnam War, because that's the sound of Vietnam War, helicopters. It's wasted on Russians. They cannot understand it unless you tell them what it's all about. And many other things, and one of them was, remember Allentown? And and we talked about it and said, Ole, what do you think they're gonna think about Allentown? I said, well, that's very close to home to them. And so what Billy did, he went on stage and he said, well, that's a song about godforsaken place in Pennsylvania. There is a steel mill there, and they're closing it down, and they tell all the young people in town that things are gonna get better, guys, just stay here. Sounds familiar, guys, right? So audience could relate to the stories that he was sharing with them, and he did it so well, but for me it was a challenge because some genius, I don't know who was that, Russell, put the speakers on the stage. Remember? They didn't have monitors, you know, and you need monitors.
Everything was underneath.
Exactly. So after the first song in rock and roll concert, you're deaf.
Yeah.
You can't hear anything, and I'm translator. And actually, I'm higher than Billy. So I cannot just stand like this because I will tower over him. And I cannot watch his lips because it helps. Lips. So I had to stand over this damn speaker, you know, because they're on the stage, and Billy, he's walking around. So it was tough to hear what he was saying, and I think I did a pretty good job, perhaps with the exception of one thing. Nobody told me, Russell, you didn't, that at the end of every concert, since he had the first band in high school, Billy says the same thing.
Don't take any shit.
Don't take shit from anybody. So mind that it's 1987. It's the Soviet Union. And Billy Joel says, I love you all. It's a great city. I love Russia. Thank you very much. Don't take shit from anybody. And I've got a split second to figure out how to translate it.
What did you say?
Well, I don't even remember, but I came up with something, but it wasn't that right in your face as much as I wanted it to be. But it was fun. It was fun, and without any doubt, it was one of the highlights of my professional career as an interpreter and translator, which is my past life. But besides that, Billy is a great guy. So working with him, the son of Long Island, and he mentioned it many times, how proud he is to be from Long Island, and he told me stories about his childhood and this and that. He knew so much about Russia, being a high school dropout. Nevertheless, he read books about history, about Russian history. I'm afraid that with lots of Americans, when you tell them about Russia, they're just like, wow, really? You got to be kidding me. With Billy, he could relate to it. He knew history. So it was great because he could understand what people was about, what they wanted and what they expected from him. But nevertheless, as Russell said, it was a huge challenge. Guys didn't know what to expect. Nobody knew what to expect. It was a huge risk that he took, but as you saw it in Jim's film, I think it was a success.
Russell, were there any songs that the Russian people reacted to more so than people elsewhere in the world? Any highlights that you remember?
Good question, and once we got through the beginning of the show, it really seemed just like another concert, you know, and I really didn't notice that much of a difference. And let's face it, you know, people are people, and if you can, you know, it was pretty amazing that after that first night, it was just another show with another bunch of people, and it was kind of crazy. It kind of broke all the images that we had. I mean, everybody said it a million times, but I was there with my family as well. My son was there. My wife was there. We emptied out our suitcases. We met all these wonderful people, and there's one story that we were told, and I don't know if you remember this, not to... we brought a lot of extra stuff, extra guitar strings and all sorts of stuff to give away to the musicians that we knew we would meet. And we were told not to do that, and that the Army guys or whoever it was, that, you know, they were actually taking them, I think, and going to sell them on the black market. But I met this one guy, a musician guy at the hotel, and everybody was kind of keeping their distance from us. And we were just talking, and we were in the lobby, and I said, well, you know, what's your favorite stuff? And he said, well, you know, what do you hear here? And he said, well, my two favorite musicians are Bob Dylan and Mark Knopfler. And at that time, the two of them had just finished an album called Infidels, and I had the cassette. There were no CDs back then,
Oh.
you know, that we were traveling with. And I said, you know, I have that cassette. They just made an album together. I have it in my room. Just stand here and be quiet. I'm going to stick it in your pocket. And so I went upstairs and I got this tape, and we talked, and I stick the cassette in his pocket. And the guy freaks out. He was an Army guy. And he just couldn't believe it. I said, you know something, I could just go to the store and get one of these. Please take it. And that was a guy how Mark was talking in the film about the hat that he had. Well, this guy said, you know, I'm in the Russian Army, I'm going to give you my hat too, I want you to remember me. I said, don't worry about it, I remember you. But he came back the next day too, and he found me and he gave me his hat. So it was amazing the connection that we had with these people on so many levels. Another story is, I figured we were told we'd meet Stas and all these other guys. And so I made up a tape of all my favorite songs, because I didn't think would have heard all these songs. So literally all the greatest music that I could think of that I wanted to share. And I made this cassette, and we had this amazing room. I had the room next to Billy overlooking Red Square and a big grand piano in it and everything. And we brought some people up to our room and played this guy the tape. And if you could imagine hearing one after another with no preconceived notion, but I remember at one point Aretha was on, and Natural Woman, but just everything from Elvis to, you know, whatever I could think of that moved me. And they're sitting there listening to this tape and crying, and it was like so amazing. And it just, you know, in a situation like that, you go back and you think about why you become a musician and what this stuff means and how powerful it is. And it really, really struck me, and it kind of reinvigorated my, you know, commitment to what it is that I love and what we do. Sometimes you forget, you go on the road, you play the same songs every night. And there were so many levels to this trip that were so moving, both as a musician and as a person. And, you know, so, you know, when I see this, it brings back all these crazy memories. But I'll never forget it.
I want to ask one more question, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. Maybe each of you can comment on this. One of the things that really struck me was how Billy said several times in the movie that this tour meant so much to him. I don't know if it's just something that he said back then, or if it's really something that's stuck through the years. Can you talk a little bit about, you know, personally what you witnessed and what you experienced in terms of Billy's feelings about the historical significance, and also personally what it meant to him? Everybody.
Well, what was interesting is, you know, we had been through so many tours and we'd been on the road so much, and I'm not going to say we dialed it in, but we certainly knew what to do and how to communicate with each other. We were very loose, but, you know, also very professional, and we always had those connecting points as a band. And this was the first time you could sense, I'm not going to call it nerves, but, you know, there was some kind of anxiety there that I really not seen in Billy's, you know, ever. So, and I don't think he was nervous about, you know, playing. It was so much as that there's so much going on, and it meant a lot to him. So it was just interesting to watch all these different things going on. But you could feel a tension, and I wouldn't call it nerves, but there was definitely this undercurrent of tension there until we broke through. And once we broke through, it was just like any other show. So.
Well, preceding this, there was a tour that Russ was on to Cuba. And I think Billy was taken by that experience. They closed the show, if a lot of Sony artists went. And I think during that show, he realized that music, I'm sure every musician is aware of this, but that music has a profound ability to break down barriers. And I think probably having just had Alexa and being a family guy, he was looking at ways that he could contribute, and the Cold War was pretty scary for all of us growing up in it. And I think he really believed, based on that experience of going to Cuba, that he could do something that might melt tension in the world, and this was it. And I don't think he talked about it a lot until afterwards. And so I think in hindsight, when you think that just a few years from this, 4 years from this, the Soviet Union had wound down. All those Western values had started to float in, and this, I think, came in very heavily. I think it probably was one. I don't think he was taking that lightly when he said it was one of the most important, if not the
And
most
he's such a
important
history
thing.
buff, too.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
he
yeah.
really, he's passionate about this
And
stuff, and he, you know, he reads all that stuff.
And, you know, he grew up playing Russian composers. You know, he was classically trained. And this was part of his life that I think, you know, some of his family was from there. And I think this meant a great deal to him. And he was betting, actually, several $1 million that he could make a difference. And I think he did. But it wasn't acknowledged necessarily at the time. But now we can look back on it. And I think a lot of historians feel that it did melt things down in the Cold War and made a difference.
Yeah, and there's, as you saw it in Jim's film, I think Billy said that, you know, I would like to be able to tell my daughter when she's older that at the time when Russians had a choice, I decided to show them what's the choice by my art. You know, I think that if he were a carpenter, perhaps he will go to Russia to build cabinets. But he's a musician. That's his trade. That's what. But it's not about music. That's about. This is strange, and I still don't understand. And how come that the guy, with all the millions of dollars, with all the fame, with all the fans, quite of a sudden decides that he will go to Russia just to show them what is a real rock and roll? And as Jim said, it was the first time ever in the history of the Soviet Union a real rock and roll concert. The only thing Soviet was a piece of cable. That big, electric supply. The rest was brought in 16 semis to Russia at Billy's expense. So why he decided to do it, we can only guess. But I think the guy has got this very acute understanding what is right and what is wrong. And what each of us, in our own way, sometimes we're very limited in our ways, but we can do something to help other people to see the light. As we see now, perhaps things that we hoped for with Billy at that time, they didn't exactly happen in Russia. But it's not the point. The point that he gave them the chance to see freedom. And as he explained it to me, rock and roll is freedom. So he told me, you go crazy for 2 hours on stage and then you go back to normal life, but this is freedom. So everybody has got fun and don't kill each other and embrace each other, and they're all in this mosh pit, and you know, they're brothers, and that's the music which unites them. And I think that was his vision, and that's what this great song of Long Island did in Russia.
If anyone has any questions, you can raise your hand.
Yeah, just raise your hand, we'll get around to you with the microphone.
I'm on this side, Dylan's on the other.
Hi, my question is for Oleg. The poet, I'm sorry, I didn't know the poet Vladimir, I can't recall his last name.
Vysotsky.
Yes, was that by accident? Billy Joel just happened to see all these people online, or how did that happen? And could you just tell me a little bit about that poet and how it struck Billy Joel?
It's a poet, it's kind of Russian Dylan. You know, the guy was, I think I told in the movie, which was shot in 1987, I think I told Billy that this guy had a monopoly, Vladimir Vysotsky had a monopoly for telling truth in the Soviet Union. And so I think that Billy's advisors, he had a bunch of guys who advised him on stuff, Russian, what to do, and they came up with ideas. They suggested that he meets Vladimir's mother. Vladimir Vysotsky at that time was dead. And actually he dedicated a song, Honesty, to Vladimir Vysotsky during, at the concert. And I think Russians, they really loved it. They loved the song, they loved the fact that actually that he knows about Vladimir Vysotsky. But it was difficult for Billy to relate to the guy because they come from different backgrounds, you know, different countries. The thing that he could relate to is that they were all about the same thing. Don't take shit from anybody.
Not so much a question, but a statement. I just finished a book, Edge of Eternity, by Ken Follett, and it starts with the civil rights movement in this country and goes into the Cold War and what happened in Russia with the rock and roll, and between East Germany and West Germany, and Russia taking over and the wall coming down. And it goes into the whole rock and roll movement at that time. Anybody that reads it will thoroughly enjoy the book.
All right. Oh,
I just have a question about, it's really more history. There's a gentleman by the name of Boris Grebenshchikov, am I pronouncing it wrong? I believe you did an interview of him, and I might have missed it in the film, but he was considered the grandfather of rock and roll for Russia. And I know he used a lot of lights and things, but I'm wondering, evidently, they weren't allowed to scream and yell and do all the things they were doing, as we saw in the Billy Joel concert. Do you know anything about that history?
Boris was started as an underground rocker in St. Petersburg. Had a pretty big following there. By the time Billy went, it had actually progressed where there were official bands and unofficial bands. Official bands had to play the same sets, the same songs every night. They were often written by the Composers Collective, men my age probably. Any derivation from that was considered a serious violation. Boris was a poet and a rock and roller. He was not an official band like Flowers or Time Machine, two very popular ones. He kind of did things on the down low. After this, there was tremendous change after this concert. Not maybe directly involved, somewhat directly involved, but things got a lot looser a few years later, so that there were rock concerts throughout Russia, big ones, especially just a year or two later. And Boris had a following. Boris was considered the Dylan of Russia, and Billy went to meet him and spent some time with him, is still very respected. He's actually just taken a lot of flack for singing out about the Ukraine, as did the head of the Time Machine. So there were a number, rock and roll was so popular that it didn't just happen. There were thousands of bands all throughout the Soviet Union. They played kind of underground. They made their own guitars. They had Bone records recorded on X-rays that they traded. And Billy just came at a time when I would say the government wanted and allowed this music. And Boris was very interested in it. I don't think the interchange that could have happened between Billy and Boris could have been phenomenal, but I think maybe some alcohol got in the way.
Oh, God.
I think we have time for one more question, and then there's a reception, and some of you can come up and talk to them individually if you're interested.
Could I just say, first of all, tremendous presentation. My wife and I had the opportunity, applause is worthwhile. My wife and I landed in Moscow on 9/11 at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, which would be about 8 o'clock in the morning here in New York. And I wanted to point out that I thought the Russians were the most kind people in the world, sharing their sympathies to us as Americans. It was just so moving. Lenin Square, right where we were right there at that spot, the Russians were coming up to the Americans, and it was just amazing. On a lighter side, I had the opportunity right at Lenin's tomb there. I had a souvenir, and I went up to one of the officers who was in charge there. And where the young officers were giving the police hats over, I gave a police patch to the officer in charge there. And he called over the youngest officer, and he pulled off his Velcro patch and gave me that patch. I have that at home.
Oh, that's great. You know, I just wanted to say one thing, that Billy, in summary, said that he went over there a cold warrior, but when he got there, he was really skeptical of the Cold War and the people that had promoted it. And that he found that actually Russian people loved Americans, wanted as many things American as they could, and maybe both sides, power-wise, had played into the Cold War for money. And I'm not sure that's not so far from the truth about the Cold War. We spent about $10 trillion each country during, I think about $20 billion a year on weapons that were never used, of course. And weapons might have had some play in the end of the Cold War. I guess some people could say that we outspent the Soviet Union. But also, I think nature just took its course. And I think Billy came back, he said, when I came back, I didn't believe in the Cold War. I didn't believe in the concepts about it. I didn't really even believe in our government in terms of what I had learned about the Cold War. So those were important things, I think, that perception, when people got together and had free interchange, like in Georgia or backstage or all these times that these guys experienced, it was a love fest. And that's really not what we were taught. And they were very interested in American culture and kind of shared your experience. Just wanted to say one thing in parting before we go to the reception. It takes a lot of people to make a film. Often as the director, I get a certain amount of attention, but it really is a team. And a couple of the people who are members of that team that were really important to this are here. Jeff was a co-producer with me. We did every part of this together. He's a great guy. This was one of the most joyful projects in my life. And I got to meet all of you. And my dear friend Heather Smith, who's from this very area, was a producer on the film in the back. She's with her relatives. And her dad would have been very proud to be here tonight. All right.
And if I could just say one last thing. With the showing of this film, some of you may or may not know that one of the reasons we wanted to show this movie this week is because on Thursday, the Long Island Music Hall of Fame is having an induction ceremony, and we will be paying a special tribute to honor the anniversary of this actual tour that the band and Billy took to Russia. But in addition, Russell will be inducted into the... Along with Liberty and Doug, okay, and
Richie.
And Richie. So, thank you very much for coming tonight, and thank you to our guests, Ola, Jim, and Russell. Russell, did you want to say anything else before you go, or no? Okay. Thank you very much.
Please join us in the cafe. Our guests will be there. I'm sure they'll be happy to talk some more. Thank you so much for coming and support the Long Island Music Hall of Fame.
When I saw that film, and he rolled off the casket and then took his shoes off.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Got so much.
Yeah,
the rest should work with the yeah, all over fine if you can, please.
Videotaping somebody serving a soda. I was like,
What? Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I need to give something to Andrew. Thank you so much.